You're listening to Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. We're coming to you from the unceded traditional territory of the Salish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. I'm Bernadine Fox, and this is Both Sides Now.
The DTES Response Fund supports COVID-19 rapid response efforts for the 15,000 people at risk in Vancouver's downtown east side. Your financial donation helps cover food, hygiene products, cleaning supplies, transportation, and telecommunications. All donations are being received by the Network of Inner City Community Services Society and will receive a charitable tax receipt. Visit their website at dtesresponse.ca. That's dtesresponse.ca.
You're listening to Both Sides Now on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm your host, Bernadine Fox, and today we're going to talk about an issue that has rocked the world, not just Canada, the United States, but all across the world. People are being shocked by the discovery and announcement that the bodies of 215 children were found buried in unmarked graves at what once was the Kamloops Residential School. And I waited to address this issue because as a white settler, I wanted to be sure that I wasn't just restating sensational bits of news. And as a member of a family where more than half of us are Tsuut'ina outside of Calgary, I wanted to focus on the impact this is having and why. And I also want to give other white allies solid information about how they can help, offer support, and in particular, what they should or should not be doing at this time. And to do all of this, I can't think of anyone better to chat with than Dr. Patricia Vickers, who is a former clinical director of the First Nations Health Authority in BC. She also holds a PhD and is a psychotherapist and consultant and is from the Gitxsan territory. Welcome, Patricia.
Hi, Bernadine.
I'm so glad to be talking to you again. I know I've already said that when we chatted before, but it's a refreshing conversation always, and I'm looking forward to this one as well. So let's talk about the 215 kids that were found. This is not anything new to the First Nations community, is it? It's not new information.
The deaths?
The fact that a lot of children died and didn't come home.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it's not new.
One of the things that I've seen on Facebook with folks is that it feels what a lot of people were saying was that that they feel believed finally, that they've been saying this over and over and over for decades, and that nobody believed them.
Right.
Have you heard?
Yeah. Right. And I think it's not only about believing. I think it's also about dismissing, which isn't even, it's not even considering
right
our Canadian history.
So just negating it, erasing it.
Dismissing without inquiring.
Right. I had an experience in the early 90s. I was working with survivors of child prostitution and pornography, and I tried to tell the police that this was happening, and I got laughed at. I got told that it wasn't possible because child pornography was not produced in Canada, and that was it, flat out. Don't even talk to me about this. He didn't want to know anything else, and that's kind of what you're talking about, right? This sort of absolute dismissal of not even looking at the details, not checking into a fact or doing anything to find out if it was true, this horrendous thing that was happening.
Right. And this is over a period of over 100 years of it happening. So
I think there were about 130 schools in Canada run by Catholic, Christian, United, and Anglican.
Right. Anglican, Roman Catholic, and United Churches, right?
Right.
And this one in Kamloops was a Roman Catholic school.
Right. I've also heard terrible things that happened at the school that I'm not going to go into, but I mean, it's really hard to come out of a place where you have been so traumatized and to not have a place to talk about it and not have a place when you do talk about it that you're believed. So I imagine that, these children that have been found finally provides a lot of people with some validation.
I think not only the children from the different nations who attended Kamloops, and it's Indian residential school. Mm-hmm. Often the word Indian gets dropped, but that's a correct term for them. And survivors have said to me, don't drop that word because it's loaded, and it carries, like the Indian Act, it carries, just in that word, there's a whole lot of history attached to it. So there were children from different nations, and I was at the Roman Catholic Indian Residential School on Cooper Island when they were throwing the cornerstone into the ocean. I'm a second generation survivor. My father attended St. Michael's Anglican Indian Residential School, as did his mother. So it was important for me to be there. Plus, at the time, I was contracting with what was then known as Shalitan Health Society, which was just outside of Chemainus. And after they threw the cornerstone into the ocean, then there was a washing that happened in the Coast Salish Way. And after the washing, one of the men stood up and spoke of when his 5-year-old sister was pushed from the second floor of the school out a window by one of the nuns and died on impact. So that was the first time I heard an Indian residential school speak about, actually it was the second time. That was the first time I'd heard of a sibling. The first time was another Roman Catholic school that's in Fraser Lake, Le Jacques. And it was an elder who was in a treatment program, and 4 of them had run away during the winter, and it gets really cold there in the interior. And they wanted to go home, and the 4 of them ran away, and I don't know how far they made it. The elder didn't say, but what happened was when night came and the temperatures dropped, the 3 boys huddled over this elder who was the youngest and the smallest. So they put him in the center and kept him warm. And so he survived, but the 3 died. They froze to death. So, those are 2 stories that I personally heard. I think of Senator Murray Sinclair, who heard so many, many, many more stories than that. So,
and that's through the Truth and Reconciliation? Is that where she would have heard? Yes.
Well, he did, yeah.
And that, if I can't imagine that the audience doesn't know what that is, but in case they don't, or they're listening from another part of the world, the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, I think it was called a committee. Commission. Okay, and they were tasked with hearing the stories. I'm not sure it was just about residential schools, was it? Or what am I missing?
It was the Indian residential schools and those survivors. So they were giving account of the conditions, their experiences in the Indian residential schools.
And what has happened with that now that we've gotten to this place of, I think the interviews have stopped, and Are they putting all the information together? Have they produced a report or?
Yes, there is a report, and all of the statements, the accounts, I want to say, of the survivors were recorded, and I don't remember where they're kept right now, but they will be destroyed. And so Senator Murray Sinclair is working with others to prevent that from happening, because we need, as Canadians, we need to have that information so we don't ever forget. And so here we have these remains because of science and new technologies in science. These 215 bodies have been found, and so one elder here on Haida Gwaii had said, if we look at the fact that each child had a mother and father and grandparents on both sides, we just begin to look at how within one family how many people this involves. And so we multiply the 215 by family, and we have some idea of the impact of
and
the loss of those children back then, and now having found them. So.
And I believe that they will be able to identify the remains through DNA, won't they? They will be able to at least find families or familial ties.
I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen, and that really, I would think, is going to be determined by the First Nations who are involved, because that's their just out of respect, and also as far as who has the authority, it's going to be the communities. If we look at how things are done traditionally. It's the people who have the say, not the law or not science or anyone else.
I've dealt with trauma with survivors from before, and I know that the discovery of the 215 children has been triggering for them as well, because they came from quite severe abuse where they witnessed people dying and stuff as well. It's not the same as residential schools by any means, but I can extrapolate from that and imagine, how many survivors we have in Canada, because you count those numbers that you just did and then times it by the 130 schools that we know existed in Canada, and that's a lot of people. And then you start adding all the people born from those residential survivors, and what kind of trauma is being passed down from parent to child. The impact is tremendous. I mean, not just the abuse and the trauma, but now the discovery and the validation. It can bring all of that trauma forward for folks. I know that people are having a hard time, because one of the things that I've heard is that even having that validation can be overwhelming, and it can bring it all back, and people can end up with PTS, flashbacks and stuff.
I think largely what's happening is that the survivors have been validated, and then you have second and third generation. So you have adults who are my children's ages, and I think in that generation, those who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, I think that it's really challenging for them, because they may or may not have had parents who are my generation who can articulate what lived trauma means. And so you have the third generation who who feel it and have sensed it. It's been in their body, but they have no way of articulating what this energy is. Mm-hmm. And then they have this news, and it really validates them as well, because I've unintentionally passed my suffering on to my children. So it really, for me, it's only been within the last 10 years that I've come to understand trauma and the nature of trauma, and first through somatic experiencing, and then in the last 5 years through just intensive study of how trauma changes the brain. Right. And now that I have that information, first for myself as an incest survivor, and then as a parent, and then as a psychotherapist, it's the brain research is all fairly new, and we don't really see much of it happening for those who are not able to afford $180 an hour for neurofeedback. Right. So, and then as well, First Nations health benefits, the maximum that they will pay is $150, and that's for a practitioner who is registered with the College of Psychologists or the College of Social Workers. So anyone who isn't registered with either of those two colleges, then they get $90 an hour. So so you might have somebody who has the skills and the understanding and the knowledge, and but their fee is over and above that. I mean, you're looking at $180, $200 an hour. So, so I think that when we look at the methods to help, we're just really at the beginning of it as Indigenous people to see what's available, and also to understand that complex post-traumatic stress disorder is also a validation of our history in this country. Yes. And the depression, the suicide, the addictions, they're all related to the atrocities that our grandparents and our parents have suffered because they're Indigenous. So the 215 really just opens the door to all of this.
I know. It's like it feels like on my end as that it is the door. It's not the opening of the door. It is a door, and that door has been opened. And So what I wanted to sort of point out was that the things that happened in the residential schools weren't just, bad people doing bad things to kids because they were messed up in their head. It was a concentrated effort to kill a culture. It was a form of genocide, or maybe I shouldn't say a form of genocide. Maybe we should be just calling it what it is, that it was Canada committing genocide against the First Nations communities. When you take children away from their family, and then you take away everything that is important to them that has come from their culture, and you take away their language and their access to their family, you are basically killing off a people, not just physically, but emotionally and culturally. I don't know. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think, for yourself and for many Canadians, it's just waking up to this. And science has moved everyone into it. For myself, you're not saying anything new. No. So it's something that is a reality. And it was an attempt to obliterate, an attempt that didn't succeed. So, I mean, right now, if you've had a chance to catch the wonderful film, The Wisdom of Trauma, there's a whole discussion that's been happening through Science and Non-Duality through California and that amazing couple. And really, in the larger world, and I was also speaking at the Boston Trauma Conference, so it's just a beginning to really look at trauma and ways to heal trauma. But something that they're saying is, look at what's happened to the indigenous people of North America, and they've survived. So they're doing something.
Right.
There's something in how they're living that we need, that the rest of us need. And I would say definitely.
I imagine that white people, when they came here, thought of themselves as much more civilized, much more advanced, much more everything. But the more I become familiar with First Nations perspectives on the world and life and their part in it, it becomes clearer and clearer to me that the First Nations communities were far advanced than folks who were coming here as settlers. Not just in how they worked the land, but also in how they communicated with each other, and they had their different familial relationships, and how they, to me, it's just much more sophisticated than what white people who came here had, and I think still to this day have. I think part of what stops us as white people from moving forward and learning more is that we think we're right. And so therefore we don't need to do anything. Do you think that the residential schools was the beginning of systemic racism? I just looked at the time and realized we really need to take a break. So let's just stop here and have everybody come back, and we'll be right back, folks. everyone. This is Bernadine Fox from Both Sides Now that airs on Vancouver Co-op Radio every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM, is an innovative radio station that gives Both Sides Now an hour every week to unpack mental health. We stay on the air with donations from folks like you. So if you can donate, visit www.coopradio.org. That's www.coopradio, all one word, .org, and hit the donate button on the top right-hand side of the screen and follow the directions. Or you can mail your donation by check directly to 370 Columbia Street in Vancouver, BC, V4A4J1. And then come join us at Both Sides Now here every Tuesday at 5 p.m.
Created by your First Nations Health Managers Association, we introduce InfoPoint, a convenient and accessible helpful desk for First Nations health managers looking for credible sources of information on COVID-19. Don't have time to dig? Talk to a real person now at 1-855-446-2719 or email infopoint@fnhma.ca. Indigenous Health Today is another resource of information by region at ihtoday.ca.
You're listening to Both Sides Now on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, and I'm chatting with Dr. Patricia Vickers about the world being rocked by the knowledge that 215 bodies of children were discovered at the Kamloops Residential School. So before we ended the last time, I was asking whether or not you think the residential school system might have been the beginning of systemic racism here in Canada. Is that where it was born, or do you think it was born before that, or was this the place where it became entrenched?
I think it's before that, and if we look at the writing of Paulo Freire, the Brazilian educator, who one of his books was Pedagogy of the Oppressed, which really was a big help for me when I was in graduate school. That really the separation and division that humans do, and in that dominating and controlling, which is oppression, it is human behavior. So it existed and was internalized before the colonialists came to Canada. So that whole way of dominating and controlling was already in them, because it, just like trauma was for those who taught, and the priests and the nuns who were in the Indian residential schools who abused and killed and raped, they also were deeply traumatized people, which isn't about excusing or saying they weren't responsible or accountable. There is that responsibility and accountability. And you know, when your outrage, I was saying during the break, to me, it mirrors what I've experienced in conversation with different friends that I have who are not Indigenous. They're outraged and they're shocked, because here science is validating what's been said for a very long time. When we look at the churches and how long it took for the churches to take responsibility for the atrocities, for me, what's sad about it isn't that they were churches. What's sad about it is that the churches are rooted and grounded in the teachings of Christ. So we get all caught up in the money of it, and we overlook the spiritual principles that were not lived. We're far from being lived, and so there's the responsibility as people who represent these teachings to make it right. So in the discussion that's happening around the churches, that isn't mentioned, that the Christian churches are rooted and grounded in a sacred text called the Bible and on teachings of Christ. So if so, then we need to be calling them to what it is they need to be doing to make it right according to these sacred scriptures, according to these sacred teachings.
That seems to be a failing. I know we're kind of getting off topic, but it seems to be a failing of a lot of churches, and not just these churches, but you look at some of the stuff that's happening, say, in the United States over the last few years, and, seeing, that churches are supporting mayhem and the destruction of things and the hurting of people. And I have always had the same question. It's part of the reason I'm not involved in any organized religion, is that the religion is one thing, and then how people are using that religion to hurt is another. And I think that's part of what happened here as well, is that, how can you be somebody that has taken an oath to God and then do what was done to these poor children? And this is why I don't think we're getting off track, because simply because we look at our own teachings, and so I'm on Haida Gwaii, and one of the Haida laws is making it right. Another one is respect. Another one is the interconnectedness of all.
So given just these three in only the Haida Nation, then there are other nations that have similar laws. Tsimshian is one heart, one mind.
Mm-hmm.
So here, which means this is one heart, one mind knows no differentiation in race, gender, or age. It's
right.
a call for it's an affirmation that we are one heart, one mind.
Mm-hmm.
So what's been done to Indigenous children has been done to self. So and these are spiritual teachings. So and they're also the teachings that help some of the residential school survivors that I counseled to survive,
right?
Along with their language. So two people that I co-facilitate trauma trainings that I've developed are Dave Bellew and Freddie Johnson, both from the community of what's known as Alkali Lake. They're Secwepemc speaking people, and they never lost their language when they were in school. And they're amazing people, and just working with them, what I hear them say over and over again is it's their grandparents' teaching, it's their language. It's that spiritual connection that helped them to survive.
Right.
So yeah, so for me, I think it is horrendous. There's a real sadness, and as well, there's this knowledge that every child, not only in Kamloops Indian Residential School, but in all 139 schools, because as has been said, this is just the beginning of science validating our history as Canadians. So, I think that just seeing as well that your outrage is something that's connected to so many, and below the outrage is pain. Mm-hmm. It's pain around powerlessness. It's pain around the ability to change anything. It's been done. It's happened. Yeah. This is our history.
There is one thing that can be done, though, as a white person, in my opinion, and that is to truly recognize what happened. And it kind of goes back to what you just said, is that what is done to one is done to yourself, right? It's so as somebody who is white and has grown up white, I have always known about I actually went to a residential school in Drumheller. Half the kids were white and half the kids were First Nations, and but it was not anything as bad as what I'm hearing about. But so I've always kind of known about it. I've always kind of known that it was bad, that really bad things happened. I think the discovery of 215 children and knowing that this is one school of very, very many. And hearing some of the stuff that's come out on Facebook, some more of the survivor stories that kind of give it more depth, that what I'm facing is not just this horrendous story. I'm facing the fact that I come from people who did this to people, who treated others in this way. And so it is about looking back at yourself. And either you're somebody who can do that and look at yourself and recognize that that is a part of your history and that is a part of what has given you privilege in your life, or you're somebody who's going to deny it and say it's not important and people should just move on and get over it and all of those things. But what you were saying about how if you do it to somebody, you're doing it to yourself, really made that make sense for me. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. It's also in Buddhism, in so many religions that that we're all connected, the interconnectedness of us.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's possible that they're going to be able to do more in other schools to determine if other children are buried. I mean, I think we can all assume that that's true, but where they're buried and be able to get them home, or do you think that that's going to happen now, or?
I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen from here. I think what's important is just supporting, especially elders in our communities at this time, and I imagine those who know that they lost children in Indian residential schools will be the ones. They're the voices that need to be speaking to this, not those of us who haven't. So,
You're right.
But as far as support goes, it's going to be to elders, and then to the adults who are my children's generation. They need those who are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s, where they know that this is their history, but this validation also validates what they've grown up with and what they've known in their bodies and in their souls. So that's really the main focus at this point, is being a support to each other.
And our First Nations communities making sure that support is there for folks? Because I know the other thing that's come out recently is the day schools. And that was something I did not know anything about. I'm 60. I should have known about day schools, and I didn't. And that the trauma and abuse that happened in day schools was similar to what happened in residential schools, except the children were allowed to go home at night. So our communities, what kind of support should communities be putting in place for their elders?
It's already happening through songs, through meetings, and sometimes, a lot of the times, it's just being able to talk about how you're feeling and having other people hear it.
Right.
So, and for those who attend church in different communities, that's still something that helps elders. I know that they're also offering that kind of support. And in Kamloops, they had spiritual leaders from the different communities and nations going into the school, and because the Kamloops people, the Kamloops, I'm sure they are appreciating the ones who are coming in and singing songs and bringing in their power and their strength,
right,
their healing. So, so it is happening, and it's happening in a way that it's happened for thousands of years.
Right.
And then there's counseling as well that's available, and most communities have that through their health centers. So,
I had a friend recently. She's not my friend anymore, but she I get mistaken for First Nations all the time, and she assumed that I was First Nations, and she was retired, white, typical upbringing of a white person, middle class. And she came to me and said, I really want to get involved with First Nations and do some help or something. I had that icky feeling, it's like it just was another situation where somebody wanted to help, but not because she wanted to help, but because she wanted to feel good about herself in some ways. So I think in some ways that white folks, we don't really know how best to support. We want to, I think, but we don't know how best to. We're struggling with our own systemic racism that's embedded in our beings because of the world we've lived in. I have been looking at how racism has impacted on how I've thought about First Nations people since I was about 12. That's a long time, and I got to live on a reserve for a period of time and come face to face with it. And I've raised a First Nations child, and I'm intimately involved with the lives of my 5 First Nations grandchildren. So every day I come up against my own internal racism that I get surprised that it's still there, but I'm committed to ensuring that by the time I die, which is in about 30 years, I will have confronted all of it. And I only lived in my home in that environment for 16 years. So, yeah. Anyway, so white allies, I know, want to help. They want to do something. What should they do, and what should they not do?
Well, I think that that first of all, it's really important to be educated to trauma, to your own trauma first, and to have a really good understanding of your own trauma. And I think it's important at this point. Not everybody has people, indigenous people, who they can speak to, but they want to speak to how they're feeling and what they're thinking about this finding. So I think that that's about self-care, right, and that's the most important thing. And then Senator Marie Sinclair spoke to how we need a healing center first for the survivors and then for all of the records. That we need that. I think we need more than one. So there are practical ways in which support can be given to see these things happen,
to make sure
see them
they
come about.
Yeah. I've also heard that there's a call for the United Nations to come in and investigate not just these 215 children's deaths, but also, any other, which we know exist at other residential schools. It seems to be a very valid point that we shouldn't be having our own government investigate themselves, however long in the past it was. What do you think about that?
Oh, I think that's more a question for Senator Marie Sinclair than me.
There you go. Well, I'll have to give him a call then. I will do that. Patricia, thank you so much for coming and chatting with me about this. It's an important topic, and we've barely touched on it really, but I have appreciated having this time with you. Thank you so much.
Right. Thanks so much, Bernadine. Take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
Yes, bye-bye.
Brothers and sisters of sight. Over 500 years oil and to ore. We will be idle no more. And we must stand for the right to be praised. And we will rebuild our own society. And we will sing, we will sing, we will sing our own song. And we will teach you about the right to be free. And we will rebuild our own society. And we will sing, we will sing, we will sing our own song. Oh, yes, for the right to be free. We will rebuild our own society. And we will sing, we will sing, we will sing our own song. And we and occupy for the right to be free. And we will rebuild a just society. And we will sing, we will sing, we will sing our own song.
The Downtown Eastside Women's Center has been helping self-identified women and their children for decades, but today, the DEWC needs your help. Due to the COVID-19 crisis, the center has had to cancel its annual in-person fundraisers, depriving the center of crucial financial resources. Services such as hot meals, clothing, showers, and secure mailboxes are now in jeopardy. To find out how you can help the Downtown Eastside Women's Center, please visit their website at dewc.ca. That's dewc.ca.
You're listening to Both Sides Now on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox. Since this interview was recorded, another 751 bodies were located on the grounds of the Kamloops Residential School in Saskatchewan. The type of ground-penetrating radar used in Kamloops and Kamloops is now being planned at other Indian residential schools across Canada. I suggest we all prepare ourselves for being confronted with the reality of what happened to Indigenous children in these God-forsaken places. Let us pray this time we acknowledge what has happened here instead of looking away. As for me, it took some time before releasing this interview because something nagged at me about my own performance. One, I misspoke where Dr. Vickers was from. It's not Kitsan. It's Tsimshian and Heltzuk, and I apologize if I have mispronounced those two names. And two, I regret the use of the word discovery. These children were not discovered. The survivors of residential schools have been saying that they were there for decades. We just haven't looked. But the biggest thing I got was from a comment Dr. Vickers gently told me after the interview. It is something that I've struggled with for a few years, not just around Indigenous issues. It touched on something my grandchild has been trying to tell me, and I confess I've had a hard time getting past my own defensiveness at times. Being accused of something that I don't feel I have personally done or intended to do is hard for me, but I got it. It's the difference between intent versus how your words land on another human being. It's the difference between feeling attacked and wanting to defend oneself as opposed to listening and honoring how it felt by another to hear words that hurt or made them feel disempowered. One centers the conversation on you, and the other centers it on the person who has been wounded. This is the time for white people to drop their need to be right or guiltless or somehow not responsible for what has occurred and to adopt a stance of listening and hearing and honoring the tremendous tragedy and trauma that our country, Canada, inflicted on innocent men, women, and children in what can only be described as a purposeful attempt at genocide. It is not the time to plead our ideas of innocence or impose our ideas of help or support on communities that are quite capable of defining what they need. Keep your eyes, your heart, your mind open. Listen, hear, honor, respect, and then provide what is asked for. And above all, don't look away when it seems too hard to hear anymore. As white people, that's our job. But don't take my word for it. Listen to the indigenous people around you. Hear what they are saying. If you're a residential school survivor or an indigenous person struggling with the news these days, you can get support from the Indian Residential School Survivors Society 24/7 at 1-800-721-0066. That's 1-800-721-0066. My thanks to Dr. Patricia Vickers for this discussion, and to Buffy St. Marie and Sherry Ulrich for their music. But most importantly, as always, our thanks goes out to you, our listeners, for joining us today. Stay safe out there.
If you have questions or feedback about this program or want to share your story or have something to say to us, we want to hear from you. You can reach us by email, bothsidesnow@coopradio.org, or via Twitter @BothSidesNowBC. This is Bernadine Fox. We'll be back next week. Until then.